It's no secret by any means, Gibbo, that what people probably refer to as the elite, the people that usually, people generally say the elite, they operate things, they do things different, tax them all, rah, rah, rah. Mate, you will find any of those people that you would call elite would have a public foundation. Even people that we don't agree with, mate, somebody like Bill Gates, the Bill and
Mm.
Melinda Gates Foundation as an example, the Clinton Foundation as an
Clintons,
example,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So they're
yeah.
all there. Now, they've got a belief because really your public foundation is based on some belief that you actually have. Now, I'm not aligned with their beliefs, but their beliefs are their beliefs, right? And when you've got a belief, then you build that around it. Now, mate, I'll tell you quite a few different ones, and I might start at some tiers in Australia that people might be familiar with, but Gloria Jean's Coffee, as an example, mate, that's a foundation. Curves Women Fitness, that's actually a religious foundation, believe it or not. We've got Sanitarium Health Foods, Nestle, foundations, mate. Seventh-day Advent Church is quite a big one, mate. They've got about 70,000 different businesses that operate underneath that, which is all around. It's not so much the religious beliefs. Their stuff is more around about, natural living, eating clean, that sort of stuff is really what they're kind of built on. Fitness first gyms, mate. IKEA, that's a big one. IKEA is a foundation that people would be familiar with. But a lot of these things, Gibbo, is that people will have their public foundation, which is a part of their mission, but then they'll have multiple different businesses that can also support, it supports that vision of what that charity is doing. But to keep it simple, mate, I could go on forever and somebody just jump onto a chat GPT and have a look at it.
Yeah.
But you'll realize anyone that's quite successful, I think these people realize that to be successful, you have to serve community one way or another. And in my experience, for me personally and people that I work with, I watch people's bank balances, I watch their purpose, their objective, I watch their network literally 10x when they make these decisions to move into the public space, because it's hard to explain, Gibbo, and I don't want to get too woo-woo on you, mate, but there's a big part of cause and effect, right? When you're doing good things for the community, then you get a return on that. But if you don't have the right vessel to capture that return, it just disappears into the void, basically, mate.
G'day, folks. Adam Gibson here from Parents with Questions. Look, a couple of years ago, we had a guest on the podcast, Trent Chapman, who spoke at length about how to get structured in terms of your business structures, legal structures, charities, foundations. We even talked about PMAs and all the private foundations, and doing those in a way that is, I guess, defensive in terms of what was coming next. We're going to revisit this because I think we're now at the phase in where we're at as a country where we've got to start thinking, well, in my opinion anyway, we've got to start thinking about not just thinking in terms of fighting the system, but in terms of creating the future. And today we're going to talk to Trent again about how to structure yourself in terms of regulatory, legals, financials, in order to best make that happen. So, Trent, love to have you. Great to have you back, mate. It's been almost 2 years, I think, since we had you here. And I think we had quite a number of our Parents of Questions community come and join you and get set up with structures and foundations and things. And we might check in on that. But a lot's happened in that time. The country's in probably a far more urgent state of affairs in order that we get ourselves set up for the future, because things have changed rapidly, as we know. But great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, mate, Gibbo, good to be back, brother. Thanks for having me, mate. And always a pleasure to work with a community like yours, mate. See the good work that you're doing. So happy to be here again, mate, and happy to, try and help people shift their mindset a little bit from defense to building.
Yeah, because look, last time I think, quite understandably, we've been in protection mode, in defensive mode, as you say, for a long time. And we've questioned education and the health system and the media and the government, big pharma, and our entire culture seems to have shifted on its axis in terms of what we trust and care, and even, government. I mean, how much of the government do we trust nowadays? And the more, I guess, a lot of people say they're awake and there's a lot of commentary and fighting the system. And I'm fed up with that personally. I think, and I know you do too, it's now time to be really building the future we want. I say, let's build the future we want our kids to inherit. And that's, I think, that's discussion we're going to have today in terms, particularly your experience around this, around how you structure yourself to create that legacy in terms of, your companies and financials and so on. So I'm going to throw this to you, but we're going from what are we fighting to what are we building? Is that a fair call? Is that where we're going to go with this today?
Mate, I think that's a fair call, Gibbo, and I think it's an important one, mate. I always say around awakening as an example. I don't believe there's such thing as being awakened. I think it's a continual thing, awakening, that we must progress forward with. And probably a good place to start maybe for today, Gibbo, could be, how do people really move from fighting the system, I guess, to building something which is lawful, peaceful and effective, and as
Mm,
you say, it's like a legacy. Because I believe that's probably where the conversation really needs to start. I know last time that we had a chat, I had a chat with the Parents with Questions community, that a lot of people were in that protection phase, Gibbo.
mm,
People were asking questions. They were trying to understand truths. They were definitely trying to protect what they had built. They were questioning education, health, money, government, social media, systems,
mm.
all the things that you just mentioned. But, that question is important, but it's not the final destination, Gibbo. So exactly what you're saying, mate. At some point, the question has got to come from, what are we fighting to what are we building? And this is where I think that maturity really comes into this space, Gibbo, because there are a lot of good people, in these communities, in particular your community. They're definitely not bad people, mate, and they're certainly not crazy people. They're parents, you've got business owners, practitioners, teachers, healers, people with belief systems, community-minded people, and they want to see this country become better. But if our whole strategy is built around fighting, Gibbo, then eventually, mate, we just become consumed by the fight. And I think the next stage, in my belief, is about peace, but also responsibility. And obviously that involves structure. And it's not about becoming like anti everything. I
Yeah,
believe it's more about saying, how do we build lawful alternatives? How do we serve properly? Like, how can we educate? How do we support families? How can we build faith within our communities? And, I think a big thing is like, how do we create a public benefit structure that's recognized, supported and accountable? And, mate, since we last spoke, you kind of mentioned it earlier. I've gone much deeper into that building phase. A couple of years ago when we chat Gibbo, there would be, mate, I would have probably helped about 30 people set up public foundations across, a different range of categories, from spirituality, religion, education, health promotion, public benevolent pathways, and, just purpose-led structures, I guess, mate. And what I've seen in this process the last couple of years is that people are carrying real missions, Gibbo, like they're legit real missions. They just need the right vessel to drive the mission. And sometimes, they also need to know someone who might know that path or knows that process and can help them understand what actually fits the mission that they're carrying. And I think that's really important, mate. You hear me bang on all the time about the who, and I think it's important that we have that. And I guess probably like a landing point, mate, is that, I'm not here to push people further into the fight. I'm here to help the right people move into the right build.
yeah, good call. And I really resonate with what you're saying about creation. Creating movements is something I've talked about a lot. Creating solutions rather than just being complaining about what's going on. Like it's easy to complain about the government, but unless we're actively involved, I mean, Jared Rennick said this, politics is not a spectator sport, and neither is creating the future. We've got to get on the field and be players. And I think creation is our superpower. I really believe that being able to create something is probably what, the darker elements of society can't do, if you like, on a spiritual level. But what you do, I think, is important, in that taking passion and wrapping structure around it creates legacy. And this is really what we're talking about today, something that can exist outside of ourselves, outside of our own conversation, and into the future. It gets beyond one founder and into something more significant. Is that fair call?
Mate, absolutely, mate. I love how you speak about, creation. At the end of the day, mate, we are all creators, and that's what we're here to do. And I couldn't agree more, mate. And I understand that everybody goes through different stages in different parts of their life. We sort of wake up first and foremost. And after we kind of wake up, we sort of need to grow up then and kind of clean up a little bit in that phase within there, mate. But yeah, mate, we are creators, and that's what we need. If any of those people that might be listening that are, quite spiritual, you'd be aware that we're kind of in a new earth is probably a good way to put it. But a new earth, requires, it requires builders, it requires creators of that sort of stuff, mate. And I probably think that, last time we really did speak a lot around about, the protection. I think that protection matters, of course, Gibbo, absolutely. But people also need to understand structure. They do need to tidy things up. They do need to stop operating blindly as exposed individuals. But again, protection is not that final destination. It really comes to the big thing. It's no longer about how do I protect myself. It's got to become like, what am I building? What does
Mm.
it serve? What structure should carry it? What's the legacy that I'm creating? I mean, mate, you're building a huge legacy at the moment, mate. You've really built that the last couple of years. It's insane. It's like, you're contributing properly to society. And I think that's what people, or what many people need now. They have questioned the system. They have seen what is broken. They have felt the pressure around all the areas we discussed, the education, the health, the media, food, money, all of it. But the next question has to be like, what are we building? What are we creating? Because questioning without creation can just become frustration.
Yeah.
And, the questioning matters, don't get me wrong, but, we've got to make sure that that questioning then moves into maturity, that comes into structure, which then becomes proper impact.
Yeah. And look, underlying that, I want to add to just one piece that if we don't do it, we're putting it on our kids' shoulders to do it. Like whether we do it now or they're going to have to do it from behind the eight ball in their own future. So I feel this is just the critical piece for all of us now who've been, awake to what's going on in the world. Let's get on the front foot and create something at least that the kids can build from. And they won't look back and go, geez, mum and dad handed us the big shit sandwich. But at least they
Like,
gave us something to work from.
mate, it always starts with the man in the mirror, right?
Exactly right. So just come back to some practicalities for those listening, because a lot of people listening will go, why is this relevant for our people, our listeners, our Parents with Questions community? Is this for business people or for people trying to start movements or try to create change in the community on, from a charitable perspective? Who's this for?
Mate, in all honesty, Gibbo, mate, I think it's for everybody. What we're going to talk about today, it's really for everybody because we're all a part of that change, no matter how we look at it. But there is definitely one thing that I noticed with your audience, Gibbo, with Parents with Questions specifically, and I might just sort of touch on that. Like your community is already asking the right questions, mate. The parents have questioned the education, the health, the food, all the things we've mentioned. And they question what their children are being raised into, exactly what you just said. And this is super powerful, Gibbo. Like I couldn't agree more with you, mate. I don't have children myself, and I know how important it is for me. So I can only imagine what it's like to be a parent, a business owner, no matter who you are, but someone who's got that responsibility for the future. But if all we're going to do is just keep questioning, again, we're just going to get stuck in this frustration. So the real power is going to come when the questioning turns into the creation, like you've said. And I think with, Parents with Questions, mate, we know that there's people that are concerned about education. And maybe those people could be here to build an education pathway. Mate, we know there's plenty of people in Parents with Questions that are about health. Maybe they're here to build a health mission. And maybe they're here to get that publicly recognized to make a difference. You've got people in your community, families that are concerned about being isolated. So maybe they're here to build, a community foundation or something based on that. Plenty of people, mate, in your audience. I've got to meet so many people and I work with quite a lot of your people in your audience that have got a lot of faith and values and morality. So maybe they're here to build, an ecclesia. It could be a religious thing. It could be a spiritual thing. And I guess, mate, if you're concerned about children growing up without truth, then maybe here to create, teaching, exactly what you're doing, mate, mentoring, public education. And again, I suppose I just come back to give out at some point, the question is not just what is wrong. It's got to come back to like, what am I responsible for building now? And I think this is where the support matters because most people do not lack, they don't lack purpose. I definitely don't see that in Parents with Questions community. They certainly don't lack passion either, mate. They don't lack concern for their children or their community. But what they often lack is just the pathway. They do not know where to start. They do know they don't know who to speak to, who might be the first person. They don't know what structure fits.
Mm.
They might not know the difference between a charity, a foundation, a trust, a business, a PMA, a public foundation, a religious foundation, education, or a benevolent structure. But the mission's there, the heart is there, but the blueprint is missing.
Yeah, that's very, very true. A lot of intent, a lot of passion, and we're just wrapping structure around it now. So, with that in mind, look, we're going to talk about public foundations, but a lot of people in our audience have looked previously and gone down the road of PMAs, like private member associations and private structures, and this world of being in the private. What's the difference between what you're talking about, a public foundation versus a PMA?
Well, Gibbo, mate, I think we just got to be really honest here. A lot of people get, attracted to private pathways because they're tired. They're tired of being told what to do. They're tired of the overreach. They are tired of systems that just feel heavy, disconnected and broken. So when someone offers a private pathway, it can sound quite attractive. And believe me, mate, I understand why people go there because on the surface, a private foundation or a PMA or any private structure can look like the easy choice. It can sound like set this up, sit outside the system. You're protected, you're private, you're done. But that is where people need to be careful because simple on the surface does not always mean sound underneath. A lot of people choose those pathways because they do not have the legal literacy or maybe the financial literacy or even the structural literacy to know what else is possible. So the private pathway becomes attractive because it feels fast, simple and empowering. But if the structure is not recognized, it's not properly understood, or it's not supported by the right professionals or not aligned with what you're actually building, then what looked like it was easy in the beginning can create a lot of confusion later. And that is where public foundations are very different. They might require more thought up front, but they're lawful, they're recognised, they're endorsed, they're even supported, Gibbo, and they're designed for public benefit. So the challenge is probably this, mate. Most people do not know where to start. They do not know what category that they fit in. They do not know whether they should be, advancing religion, spirituality, education, health, whatever it may be. But they also don't really know who to talk to, Gibbo. It's a tough one. Like, is it a lawyer? Is it an accountant? Is it the ACNC, the Australian Charities Non-for-Profit Commission? Is it the ATO? Is there a trust specialist? Is there someone who understands charity law? And even then, mate, many lawyers and accountants do not specialize in this space. So people either freeze or they choose the thing that sounds easiest. So the analogy that I like to use is like a flat pack, Gibbo. If you have ever tried to build a flat pack with no tools, bad instructions and no idea what you're doing, it becomes a nightmare. You usually have a bit of a
Mm.
tantrum along the way. You put one pedal on backwards, you use the wrong screws, you damage the thing before it's even built effectively, right? And then halfway through that, you start sitting there thinking, gee, like, why did I even start this?
Mm.
But, another way you look at this is that if you have a friend beside you who has built that exact flat pack before, knows the instructions, has the tools and understands the order, then the whole thing changes. It's the same parts, it's the same project, it's just different guidance. And that's how I see public foundations. The structure is not impossible, but if you do not understand the blueprint, then it can feel overwhelming. I know the path very well now, Gibbo. I know the categories, I know the process. I know the pros and cons, and I know where people get stuck. But above all, I guess I know how to look at the individual mission and ask, what actually aligns with this person? Because the goal is not just to set up a foundation. The goal is to build the right vessel for your right mission, what you're doing. And if your mission is public benefit, then a public foundation just makes sense than trying to hide in a private structure. Obviously, make public foundations, they're recognized, they're lawful. Again, they're supported, they're endorsed, they're accountable. Like, they're designed to make this country better is what they're all about. It doesn't mean that they're easy, Gibbo, though, but it definitely means that they're legitimate. So a public foundation says, like, we are here to serve, we're here to educate, we're here to relieve distress, we're here to promote health, we're here to build something that benefits others. That is very different to just trying to avoid, resist, or operate in the shadows, something along the lines of like a private foundation. And I also think spiritually, Gibbo, there is something important here around that, the concept of sovereignty. And I'll just quickly touch on it, that there's only one true sovereign, and that is God. Now, whatever that means to each person listening, take it how you want to take it. But to me, that just keeps it with a clean heart because it's not about, it's not about being sovereign over anything. It's actually about being a stewardship. It's about taking responsibility. It's about using the gifts, the resources and knowledges and structures that are available to serve something higher than self. So I guess a good way to look at it, Gibbo, is that the private foundation is very much in the shadows and the public foundation is very much in the light. And if you're doing the light work, why would you be in the shadows? And one thing that comes with a lot of benefits around a public foundation is that, quite simply, mate, you do have freedom within it and you don't have to be fringe to be free, if that makes sense.
Mm. That's a good takeaway line. Don't have to be fringe to be free. That's what really attracted me to want to talk to you about this. Because I agree. What who wants to go to bed at night worrying about you know whether I get uncovered as a private citizen or whatever? I just don't need that stress. So I agree with you. I think being in the full light of day with it is makes more sense to me personally.
It
Just
does, mate. You've got to be realistic with it too, Gibbo. Like, we're in the time of technology and stuff now too, right, mate? So everything's pretty monitored. And, we're in a system where, mate, I relate a lot of things back to the Bible because, I use that for a big piece of wisdom. And one of the greatest things that I found in the Bible was, to find peace in the Babylonian system, right? Like, to find peace in the matrix. And things like public foundations allow you to do that. You get to serve. You also can, there can be a lot of great benefits for those that are operating in themselves as well too. But, mate, it goes back to what you're saying at the start. We've got to be the light. We've got to be the creators. Like, we've got to be the man in the mirror.
yeah. Can you, for clarity, mate, give me a few examples of well-known examples that people will relate to, just so we, to really wrap this, get some clarity on what these things are, because most of us know what we relate to public foundations, interact with them most days, and give me some examples of some well-known public foundations.
Oh, mate, I could give you so many.
Yeah,
I'll punch out a few names, but just before I do that, Gibbo, I'll just let people be aware that it's no secret by any means, Gibbo, that what people probably refer to as the elite, the people that usually, people generally say the elite, they operate things, they do things different,
mm,
tax them more, rah, rah, rah. Mate, you will find any of those people that you would call elite would have a public foundation. Even
yeah,
people that we don't agree with, mate, somebody like Bill Gates, the Bill and
mm,
Melinda Gates Foundation as an example, the Clinton
the
Foundation as an
Clintons,
example,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So they're
yeah,
all there. Now, they've got a belief because really your public foundation is based on some belief that you actually have. Now, I'm
mhm,
not aligned with their beliefs, but their beliefs are their beliefs, right?
yeah,
And when you've got a belief, then you build that around it. Now, mate, I'll tell you quite a few different ones, and I'll tell you, I might start at some tiers in Australia that people might be familiar with. But, Gloria Jean's Coffee, as an example, mate, that's a foundation. Curves Women Fitness, that's actually a religious foundation, believe it or not. Mate, we've got Sanitarium Health Foods,
mm,
Nestle
yeah,
foundations, mate. Seventh-day Advent Church is quite a big one, mate. They've got about 70,000 different businesses that operate underneath that, which is all around. It's not so much the religious beliefs. Their stuff is more around about, natural living, eating
yeah,
clean, that sort of stuff is really what they're kind of built on. Fitness first gyms, mate. IKEA, that's a big one. IKEA is a foundation that people would be familiar with. But a lot of these things, Gibbo, is that people will have their public foundation, which is a part of their mission, but then they'll have multiple different businesses that can also support, that supports that vision of what that charity is doing. But to keep it simple, mate, I could go on forever and somebody just jump onto a chat GPT and have a look at it. But
yeah,
you'll realize anyone that's quite successful, I think these people realize that to be successful, you have to serve community one way or another. And in my experience, for me personally, and people that I work with, I watch people's bank balances. I watch their purpose, their objective. I watch their network literally 10x when they make these decisions to move into the public space, because it's hard to explain, Gibbo, and I don't want to get too woo-woo on you, mate, but there's a big part of like, cause and effect, right? When you're doing good things for the community, then you get a return on that. But if you don't have the right vessel to capture that return,
yeah,
it just disappears into the void, basically, mate.
interesting. What are some of the other benefits, man? I'm sort of going off script a little bit, but I was just for curious to get clarity. What are the other benefits of running a public foundation to
Oh,
like in terms of regulation and taxation and what you can write off and so on? Obviously, there's
mate, it is absolutely endless, Gibbo. Like, honestly, it's endless. But the thing to be aware of, mate, is that it's not one size fits all. So depending on what your mission actually is will determine what some of your benefits can be. Now, multiple benefits, mate, so many. And I will give you a couple that are quite blanket that kind of go across all of those. But then there's additional ones depending on what your category that you'll be classified within would be. But things like, well, first and foremost, mate, like tax exempt entities, right? So they're completely exempt from tax. Obviously things that you can secure, they can be exempt from things like stamp duty, capital gains, and that sort of stuff as well, mate. You can be GST exempt as well too. If you do pay GST on things, and you can get that back. Machinery, equipment, stuff like that you may need for your purpose, that can be all tax free as well. Obviously, grants, mate. Like, grants is a huge one. There is so many grants out there, Gibbo.
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
insane. I mean, you got local grants, you got state grants, you got federal grants, you've got even heaps of banks, mate. I get a lot from banks. Banks do a lot of these,
Mm,
small little community
yeah,
sort of grants. There's continual grants popping up. You've got things too, Gibbo, like Google is a good one. So Google will give non-for-profit charities $10,000 a month in free marketing, which they can utilize. Mate, there's so many pieces to a Gibbo, but
yeah,
again, it kind of depends what category it is.
yeah,
And this is why I say it doesn't have to be fringe. Like, it most certainly can create the freedom for you. Like, quite often, if people are living on purpose, then everything they do in their day to day, like, their meals, their meetings with people, and their travel that they're doing, like, all of these things can be funded through the foundation. So if you're living by purpose, then you kind of operate your belief system through your public foundation, and you ensure that the public gets benefit. And mate, there's so many ways now when we talk about technology as an example, as an amplifier, how you can get your message out.
yeah,
It's mate, I just love it. I idolize it. I love it when people come to me that aren't familiar with this space, educate them a little bit, show them the awakened blueprint. People start to understand it. But the real beauty actually comes, mate, once people and I watch them operate for the first 6 to 12 months, and they come back going, oh my God, Trent, like, this is absolutely incredible. Like, nothing's really changed in my life except that I put the structure behind it.
yeah. To cap, just to again, I just want to make sure everyone catches this. But you said there's advancing religion. There's there's the main categories: advancing religion, advancing education, health promotion, public benevolent institutions, private ancillary funds. They're the five sort of key types of foundations or pathway.
They're your 5 main ones, Gibbo. They're your 5 main ones, and I can touch on those a little bit more. And I think you really need to break this down in the blueprint. But you've got your main sort of a category, which would be one of those 5 that you say. So like advancing religion is one. Another one, yes, is advancing education, health promotion, charity, public benevolent institute, and your private auxiliary fund, which they're not really appropriate. They're more for people that don't want to do the work, but they want to minimize their taxes down to 4% a year. And then they want to donate that money to other charities that do the work. Then you've got subcategories from there, Gibbo, and you can kind of cross a few things. Some people may have a foundation, and that foundation might be advancing education, and it might be advancing health, as an example. Or you might have one that's specifically just around about, building communities within Australia, as an example. So they're your 5 main ones, mate, but then it's your subcategories that can come off there. And those subcategories, Gibbo, that's really what determines what other benefits that you do get. And being aware that these benefits come from the government, they come from the ATO, they come from the ACNC. So they're the ones that approve the benefits.
Yeah, gotcha. What about for people who've already got a business? How is this, if you've already got an existing business and it's working well, making money, how does this interact with it, or does it take the place of it?
Well, mate, again, it kind of depends. It depends on the person, depends what they're doing, depends what they're driving. But primarily, mate, the way you've got to look at it is you've got to look at things as sort of different hats, as an example. So you might operate in a business, which could be a commercial entity, and you might spend, 90% of your time in that commercial entity driving that. And then you might have a public foundation as that separate entity where you might spend 10% of your time and you do the work which gives back to the community. You might find that your commercial entity may potentially support the work of the foundation and might donate profits. Now, depending what classification that you have as a public foundation, you might be able to give a donation gift receipt back to the business, that they could write that off for the donation. You might have things that may be trusts and stuff like that, where you might be effectively making some money in the commercial entity for the purpose to be able to fund what you really want to do in your public foundation. So multiple different ways, again, it can look. It's almost like a web gibbo, but the key here is to architect around the individual and around the person or the people that are driving the mission. And I think that's where a lot of people can go wrong at the start, Gibbo, is they can try and align with what's got the best benefits, where it's all at, but then effectively it takes them out of alignment of what their actual mission is. So the best thing is to know what people's mission is, and then to build around that mission and ensure that that vessel is the right vessel that then carries that mission. But there's so many things you can do, Gibbo. Like as I was saying before, if I use a church as an example, the Seventh-day Advent Church,
Mm.
mate, there's 70,000 businesses that feed into that. And those 70,000 businesses basically send their profits from their businesses to be able to support the work of the Seventh-day Advent. So,
Yeah.
mate, a lot of things. So who is it appropriate for? It's appropriate for everyone, mate, no matter how you look at it. The thing that I find that people need to be aware of first and foremost is that when we talk about any type of an entity, so whether it be a public foundation, a company, a trust, whatever it might be, it should be one entity, one purpose is the way to look at that, Gibbo. So each thing has specifically got the one purpose. Now, there can be a collective vision between all those things, which is, that's how I operate my stuff. There can be a collective vision, but one entity, one purpose. And then obviously for each one of those purposes, you've got your different benefits for that. And then when you work it in as a bit of a web, then you realize that it's about having the balance, and the balance comes back to the right structure.
So but tell me if I've got this wrong, but there's a possibility. I'm thinking as you're saying that there's a couple of businesses I know that probably aren't, they've got a good business running and they're consumed by that, but they want to express, their mission, if you like, or they want to put a dent in the future and do something to impact the country in a way they see as important. But this potentially could be, not say layered in, but bolted on or integrated with the business in ways that need to be architected, as you say, but you could use a foundation in alignment with your business to increase your impact in a way that is, yeah,
110%, Gibbo,
yeah, okay,
110%, mate, and that's
okay,
exactly how it works. Like,
yeah,
as I was saying earlier, mate, anybody that here that, that does good work will always have a public foundation. They're not always 100% in that. That would be somebody that you'd probably call 100% philanthropist. Like, I spend a fair amount of, like, a lot of my time in that space, but most people realistically, Gibbo, probably spend 10% of their time in that space, mate, because we do have to be realistic about the world that we live in. You may have to have another commercial business that operates for its
yeah,
own reasons, but absolutely, mate. And this is what philanthropy is. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the time when people think of this space, I think an old mindset that we probably all grew up on was, go be a business person, get a bunch of wealth, make a heap of money, realize that all that money doesn't make you happy. You realize at that point that what does is serving community. So you move into a foundation. I think that's the old mindset of how people think. But the reality is exactly what you said at the start, mate. We're all creators. We're all here to make a change. We all have a purpose and we all have belief and we all have the ability to make an impact. So to me, it's always been, well, doesn't it make sense to move into or have an arm of what you are, what you represent, have an arm of that being a public foundation now, because it can most certainly help drive that mission, Gibbo, especially if you talk around about, and again, I'm not here to bang on about taxes, but again, I've got to bring it to the forefront. But when you have an entity that's driving your mission that may be tax exempt, you can start to find that your mission can probably accelerate a lot faster than if it had to adhere to some of those other challenges. And one thing that I will say, Gibbo, is it is far, far easier to run a public foundation than it is to run a business. I can tell you now.
in
Less
terms of
paperwork,
compliance,
yep,
paperwork,
less
yeah,
governance.
gotcha.
Far
Yeah.
easier.
I should throw this up now, just for those listening. We will at the end of here have a invitation to a live webinar with Trent for our Parents and Questions community, which will include a link, and that'll be our what you call the Awaken Blueprint. This blueprint you're referring to, that'll be. We'll share that at the end. So where you'll be able to go into more depth and understand this blueprint better for those listening. But so stay tuned for that. But Trent, and like the part of the reason why I reached out to you again is that with the current changes going on at government level and taxation and sort of the rapid, I'm going to call it decline of Australian government the way the country's going, I'm like, my God, what's going on? And we're kind of seeing this thing happening in real time. It's changing rapidly. People are really reaching out, going, "What do I do?" What are you seeing happening Australia wide? You're seeing changes to trusts and tax and capital gains and things. What do you see happening Australia wide, and what's your reaction to these changes that are looming around trusts and so on?
Mate, a couple of things there, Gibbo. There's probably two things that I can kind of elaborate a little bit on with what you say there. But before I dive into those two, I think you're very accurate, mate. In yes, the government's not great. And this is another big reason, again, why public charities are so powerful. If I was to say to you, say mental health as an example, like what does the government really do for mental health apart from probably steer us in the wrong direction, right, mate? What does it really do? Well, it doesn't really do a great deal, but why? Well, we have Beyond Blue, Black Dog Institute, Lifeline. These are all public foundations. Now, the government may not necessarily be driving those, but they absolutely fund them. Like they throw
Yeah.
big dollars at them to fund them, right? So a big part of how we become a part of it is not to be so reliant on the government. And I'm not here to fight the government by any means, because the government certainly has its place, but the overreach and being reliant on them is a big thing. So two things I'll talk on, Gibbo. I'm just going to touch a little bit more on foundations here for a moment, because I want people to be aware that these changes are already happening at the moment. And then I'm going to go on to some of the stuff around about, obviously the current proposed budget. So first thing that I really want people to understand is that, Australia's got tens of thousands of registered charities. Every year, more people are formalising their missions, into charities. Last year alone, Gibbo, was over 4.5. I think it was about 4,600 charities were approved, which is the largest since the ACNC formed in 2012. So we've now got over 65,000 charities in Australia, which I think is absolutely awesome, mate. So while some people are still sitting around saying everything's broken, others are certainly
Mm.
quietly formalising their contribution. They're building their foundations around what their beliefs are,
Yep.
because the builders are moving, Gibbo. That's the bottom line. And I think that's a big energetic shift, because a foundation's not about retreat. It is about responsibility, and it's not about hiding out. It's about standing in public benefit, with correct, proper structure and correct governance, I guess, mate. But the other thing that you say on that there, so I think that's one big highlight, mate, that the changes already happening within Australia. Foundations are taken off. People are coming back to responsibility, because if public foundations can step up in this space in a legal, lawful way, then the requirements of the government is minimised, very much minimised in that. Now, another thing that you just had said there, Gibbo, is that, yeah, you're right, mate. There is a lot of talk about trust changes, the current budget proposal and the rest of it. So what are my thoughts on that, Gibbo? Well, a lot of people are nervous about these proposed trust changes, but my view is really quite simple about this, Gibbo. That do not panic. You get educated. This is where entity literacy matters, and it's really important to understand entities, because people need to understand the difference between a discretionary trust, a unit trust, a fixed trust, a company, a charity, a commercial entity, a public benefit entity as well too, because everyone is a little bit different, right? Now, the big thing that I see at the moment when I see with the budget is that it definitely has a bit of an attack on the middle class, is how I probably look at it, with some of those capital gains taxes. But the big push on a lot of that with trusts at the moment is really around discretionary trusts. So that doesn't affect things like fixed trusts, which are charitable trusts, unit trusts. It doesn't affect unit trusts either. But I think people just need to get education, Gibbo, and now is most certainly the time if they don't have that. And that's the things that I'll share, mate, with what you just said before. Like, I'm happy to share this stuff in the Awaken blueprint so people can understand it. But we've got to be also, take a bit of initiative ourselves too, right? Like, it's pretty easy to get information these days to access it. But do not fear, do not panic. Nothing's in legislation at the moment. And if I be completely honest with you, Gibbo, in regards to how I operate with my structure, anything that's been mentioned in this new budget doesn't affect me one bit. No matter what goes through or doesn't go through, it doesn't change my structure. It doesn't change my purpose. And that's obviously because I've architected to deliver the life that I want to live. So, mate, don't fear it. Change is inevitable. Things are happening. There's a lot of other good things that are happening while we see some of this stuff. But yeah, mate, I don't want to stress people, but it's like, get educated. And it's unfortunate because we never learn any of this stuff when we're growing up. Most of the time, our parents didn't have these educational things to share as well too. So we've got to remember that our number one asset is going to be wisdom, and just to get wise around it. But most certainly, mate, not to panic.
Yeah, and look, I think it's worth pointing out too. I've always felt that the financial system, taxation system, and everything, it's really set up to be so confusing. You go, "What the hell? I'll let the accountant figure it out." Like it's they literally give you another language to learn, and it becomes so complex and also so ridiculous at points. I was thinking about this before. Like I remember as a kid getting a second job. I don't know if this is still in place,
Yeah.
but you get a second job as a 15-year-old, and your second job used to get taxed at 50%. I'm like,
Yep.
"I'm only making 70, it's $8 an hour or something, and they're taking half of it." And at that point, as a 15-year-old, I went, "Why would I bother getting a second job? Like, that doesn't seem fair in any way." And that's sort of, the beginning of my relationship with the tax system, thinking, "This is nonsense."
Yeah, and mate,
And it
I
kind of
couldn't agree more.
so it's
Yeah.
institutionalized for us to go, give up and give you power over, isn't it?
Well, it is, mate, and interesting what you say right there, mate. I'm aware of that. I know at times I've heard people talk about, why would they? Because it's going to push them to the next tax bracket. And that similar scenario, mate, this is one of the hardest things that I have to quite often tell people is a lot of passionate people, Gibbo, that are doing things. A lot of these people may have a job or work that they do as their main source of income or whatever, but they've got their hobby, their purpose, their other project, which they do on the side. And that's usually set up as a sole trader. That sole trader is no different to exactly what you said when you were 15 years old. It's actually the highest tax you could possibly have as a sole trader. And it's heartbreaking, mate, because those people I find are the best people. And those people are probably the most appropriate people for things like public foundations. But if they don't have the education, they don't know.
Yeah. The other thing, just to highlight too, you glanced over this, but I think it's important for those. What foundations do open up for a lot of people is a DGR status. In other words, tax deductible status. If you achieve that, opens you up to a lot of fundraising opportunities and tax deductible fundraising, and also grants. As you said, grants. This is a whole sort of. I went in this path a few years ago and looked at what grants are available when I first set up a business accelerator around regenerative agriculture, and I couldn't believe the environment that was out there. Like, there's money flying around, as you said earlier, left, right, and center for different projects if you're set up to receive them well.
Hmm.
So it does open up this possibilities beyond measure in a lot of ways around those couple of things. Do you agree with that? It's like a
Mate, I could not agree more, Gibbo, because especially like again, and I'm not against the government by any means. I definitely think that we could be operating a little bit better, right? But at the end of the day, mate, the amount of money that is available for public foundations from the government is insane. And I'll just go back to what I was saying around about mental health before. Like all of those mental health organizations are funded through government grants, mate, and they're huge. The marketing spend, the advertising, you see them on TVs, mate. They've got offices and clinics, and they do good work. But if you're not in a position, it's almost like being I don't know, mate. What's an example? Say like if you're playing baseball, right? Like you got to have a mitt on to be able to catch the ball, right? If you don't have the mitt, then you're not going to be able to play the game. And that's
yeah,
really the big difference between this private and public thing is you're basically throwing your mitt in the back of the car and you can't use it. So you can't catch all these things. And Google's another massive one, mate. Like $100,000 to $120,000 a year just for marketing. That's huge, like, and as you say, mate, in that space, like I live up around, your old neighborhood, as you know, but
mm,
up around here, mate, there's quite a lot of philanthropists and there's plenty of people that, they might have done a lot of good work in their time. They might be a little bit older now and they may just not be, their health might not be in a position that they could do what they once
mm,
could, but they want to fund people that have got the fresh juice in them, that have got the fresh legs that are doing it. So
yeah.
insane what's available, mate.
There's a saying I've used a lot and I've seen happen in real time for myself is, courage, passion. Courage attracts capital if it's matched with structure and, the pathway. If it's not just confusion, but courage attracts capital with the right vessel and the
Mhm.
right plan in place. And that's, I agree. A lot of people supported Parents of Questions early on because of what we're doing. With a big stand out there because they didn't want to do it themselves, but they had the capital to back it. And so you play a significant role for people by having a foundation with a mission that is creating a solution. You play a role there for those who would support something and want to support it with dollars rather than effort.
Yeah. And mate, let me tell you, people speak very differently to you, Gibbo, when you've got a public foundation because you've got credibility. You're recognized. It shows that you're somebody who is a responsible person. You're putting your money where your mouth is, as an expression to utilize, I guess, mate. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And I even know myself, mate, and I don't say this in a judgmental way whatsoever, Gibbo, because I understand the private foundation. But every time I meet someone and, somebody might introduce me to somebody, and this is Trent, he does this and this, and people fire off to me, oh, yeah, I've got a private foundation. Like, it makes me cringe, mate. I'm not saying that in any judgment because it's just energetically what it does. You're like, oh, it's going to be hard for me to be able to do anything with you, like we can't really work together. We can't promote. You're not even in the game to play the game.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
credibility, mate, the legacy and the foundation, it's effectively you're building something that outlives you, Gibbo. That's kind of the point, right?
Yeah. And it
It's something
gives
passed
you a
down.
seat at the table, right? That's, like you can't have agency without having a seat at the table. You gotta be at the yeah, I'm with you.
Totally. I mean, you're on plenty of boards yourself, mate. You know the credibility that comes in that sense because it just shows that you're a responsible person and responsible people win, mate. And, when you've got your purpose, when you put your purpose first and you take responsibility with it, then obviously, all kind of abundance comes, not just your own profit. Like that's good and all well, but your health, mate, like your body vibrates different, Gibbo, like it really does. You hold a different energy.
And it's a different model of capitalism, I think this is what as you're saying it, it's like, the model of capitalism I grew up with as an entrepreneur is you make money for yourself, and you kinda said it earlier, you make money and you work hard and you pay your tax, and then eventually you have enough to give some away. But this is, it's kinda like you have to put your purpose last in order to make money, and this is what I love is you're putting purpose first and working to that.
Well,
Yeah, it
working to purpose, Gibbo's gotta
works,
be
doesn't it?
working to your
Yeah.
higher self, right? That's gotta be what we're here to do because anything that we're passionate about is what our purpose is. Like, people always ask me, and I'm sure you get this all the time, like, "I don't know what my purpose is." Well, what do you love, you
Mm,
know? And I'd find it very, very, very hard to believe, Gibbo, that deep down, if all of us didn't wanna just help other people one way or another.
mm. And look, imagine this scenario that every small business in Australia, every small and big business, small, medium, big business, had an alignment with a deeper purpose beyond just making profit. We'd have a very different society. We really would. It'd be completely different to what we have now.
Mate, completely different, and it's just like little seeds, Like, I'll give you a quick one. This is an American one, but for anyone that's familiar with America, you've got In-N-Out Burgers, which quite a big burger chain, probably similar to a McDonald's type of a thing. Mate, they're actually a church, right? And on all the papers that they wrap their burgers in, they use sacred scrolls. Now, people might look at that initially and think, "Oh, wow, that's a bit out there." But the one thing that you do see on social media and stuff is people take photos of those burger wrappers and they put them on socials. They spread the word. Now, whoever's behind In-N-Out Burgers, obviously someone who's a very faith-based person and drives that. But the impact that you leave is it's everlasting. It's a ripple effect that comes through the work that you do because your purpose can sit in everything, not just your own. You can sit in your public foundation, but can also sit in a commercial entity. That's exactly how I operate.
Mm. It's the cultural zeitgeist is heading this way too. I think, which is important to note that I interviewed Kurt Ludhart from Liberty Spenders, a US group, a
Mhm.
number of episodes back. Liberty Spenders, these guys were political campaigners, and they've realized that, business is the way to really make the biggest change in the US by, pretty much doing what we've been talking about. And they have an entire program set up to help businesses serve and capture is the wrong word, but, to really serve the what they call the liberty market over there, people who believe in freedom and sovereignty and, believe in their own free will. They're religious based, but they are there because they see it as, I can't remember the numbers, but, they've worked out the market share in the US that is looking to support and be part of mission-based businesses and values-aligned businesses is in the trillions. Like
Yep.
it's trillions of dollars a year looking for a
Yep.
home. So there is a market differentiation there. I think for any business, it's really worth considering right now. We've got at least, in my view, I think we've got at least a third of the country who are actively questioning the whole thing and feel uncomfortable. There's probably there's another third who are completely going to be closed to it and stay asleep and do whatever they're told. And then there's a third in the middle who are sitting there going, I'm feeling a bit wobbly with this. What's going on? And probably looking for, they're looking for more clarity. And so you got a fair chunk of the population looking for businesses, missions, movements that mean something to them, that resonate
Yep.
with
Mate, and
big
I think that
opportunity in
third that
marketing.
you say, that's the tipping point, that third, mate. Which way does that other third go
It's
is gonna
the
determine
wobbly
the
middle.
outcome.
The
Yeah.
wobbly middle.
Yeah,
And that's the impact we can make, right?
mate, 100%. I couldn't agree more, mate. Couldn't agree more with that. So the first thing, Gibbo, and for anyone listening, is just that I always operate with separation. Now, my entities look like this. So I have Carnabossum Ecclesia, or I'll call it KBE here, which is my public mission, and it's my public foundation pathway. I'm somebody who's very much a man of belief, but I also am aware that belief systems around spirituality and religion are quite outdated. So I try and encourage people to see that through a new lens, because at the end of the day, our levels of consciousness see through the rigid sense of religion. So I like to help people understand that in a more way that they can relate to it based in consciousness more than anything. So that's my public foundation.
Mhm.
I Am Awakening is like my commercial arm, where I do education, I do strategy, do some mentoring. It's like, it's really just that consulting arm is where I do that. So that makes money. It turns over its profit. It pays what it needs to out of the business. And then I have another arm, which is called the Carnabossum, which is my commercial product. And that's around cannabis products. So they're just physical products, oils, gummies, roll-ons, things like that people can buy online.
Mhm.
Now, all of these align in values and missions to me, but they're not the same thing. So each has a different hat, each has a different purpose, each has its own different records, each is operated, properly and independently. So the public foundation is not my commercial business, and the commercial business is not the public foundation. And that distinction is quite critical, I think, Gibbo. And I think that is where, people need to mature on that. So it's not just enough to have a big vision. The structure has to be clean enough to carry that vision. And for me, mate, my big belief, there's kind of two things that I stand by. I know me and you stand very close on this first one, is that we believe the change comes in raising people's consciousness, which is
Mhm.
why we do what we do with the work. Now, I do that through I Am Awakening. I do that through Carnabossum Ecclesia. And I also believe that cannabis is a big part to consciousness. And I also believe cannabis is a big part to healing and health. So I do that through my Carnabossum products. And I also do that through my Carnabossum Ecclesia as well, too. So you can see how they have the morals, the values, the belief systems there, but they're three separate entities.
Yeah, gotcha. That's helpful to understand, which is kind of relating, I guess, back to what you call the Awaken Blueprint. So let's just talk us through there's an invitation for our community listening to join us for a deep dive on this as a live webinar. It'll be a couple of weeks from now, I think, or whatever date we get
Yeah.
it released. But
Yeah.
talk us through what is, and it's free to attend, or no, it's not actually free to attend. I'll take that back. But talk us through what's included or what you're going to cover in that blueprint, if you could.
Yep, mate, certainly can. Well, I guess for people from here, Gibbo, so let's go Thursday, the 18th of June at
Yep.
10 a.m. and let's do the Awaken Blueprint then. So as Gibbo said, this will be a deeper masterclass for, the Parents with Parents with Questions community. And I would allow around 2 to 2.5 hours for it so we can take some questions and whatnot. Happy to answer any questions people have. So this is where I just want to slow things down a little bit, Gibbo, and actually walk people through the pathway. I want to use slides in the masterclass because a lot of people are kinesthetic learners, so they need to see that. So really, mate, the bottom line behind what we're going to go through is, I guess that a lot of these people have got their real missions. They don't know where to start. So I'll have a look at the categories, what categories are there, what the process could look like depending on what category that somebody might go down, who they need to have around them to do this. I've obviously got a team that can support people if they need that. Understanding as well, two things around about, well, what does governance look like? So what's required, which in all honesty is much more minimal compared to a business.
Mm.
What are trustees and what are the requirements of trustees? What are the ACNC regulations and what needs to be done to keep us registered? What benefits, what pros and cons come from the ATO, depending on what category that you're classified regarding to your mission? What is DGR status and who can get DGR status? So you briefly mentioned that before, Gibbo, around donation gift receipts where businesses and people can donate. You can give them a receipt. They can claim that receipt against their own taxes. We'll have a look at fringe benefit taxes as well too, Gibbo, because again, depending what your category is and your classification is, there are different things. Some foundations have unlimited fringe benefit taxes. Other ones might have restricted ones to certain amounts. We'll go through, we'll look deep at, we'll go through, religious charities advancing. We'll do education foundations. We'll look at health promotion charities and what determines a health promotion charity, because it can't just be general wellness. We need to focus
Mhm.
in on one thing.
Yep.
We'll have a look at the public benevolent institutes, Gibbo. So this is like when we want to help people that are in direct crisis, whether that be, bushfires, farming, food, housing, domestic violence, multiple array of things that can
Mm.
look like. I'll also teach people around about the private auxiliary funds, which is the one I briefly mentioned before, which is basically people that may have a bit of wealth. They can bring their taxes down to 4% a year if they donate 4% of that to other public foundations. So we'll talk about that. Mate, I'll literally go through, like, literally piece by piece, Gibbo, like all the education, the wisdom that I've have in this space. I put it all into the blueprint, like literally drop it all into the blueprint. And I want people to probably think of me a little bit like in this space. Think of me a bit like the flat pack analogy I gave before, where I'm the mate that can come over and can help you. So I can show you the blueprint, I can show you the pathway, I show you what it can look like, and I'm obviously happy to help and assist the right people as well too, mate. Along the lines, I know that you are as well too. But importantly, Gibbo, the purpose of the Awaken Blueprint is not to tell everybody they need a foundation, because that's not true. Some people it'll be appropriate for, some people it won't be. Some people it might be, at a later date. But for those that are carrying something real, then this can absolutely give them some clarity on maybe what's been missing or maybe what they weren't aware of. And for this one, Gibbo, I used to charge $2,500 to share this wisdom privately with people. But for this community, mate, for the parents with questions, and in particular, because of our relationship and the work that I see you do continually over and over and over again, I want to do something different. And all I want to do for this, Gibbo, is that I am happy if people would like to just make a meaningful donation to my charity, whatever a meaningful donation is to them, whatever they're in a position to do, I'm completely okay with. So I don't want to do any fixed ticket price or anything like that, Gibbo, but I just don't want to make it a free container each. I want it to be a contribution-based wisdom, and if people value the work, believe the mission and want to support the charity side of what I'm building, which is very much what this webinar and this podcast is about, then they can make a meaningful donation and they can join the masterclass. And I think also too, Gibbo, what we'll do, that we've got to be realistic. Not everybody can be there at Thursday at 10 a.m. So I think that we record the session, Gibbo, and we can send it out afterwards to people that may not be able to be there live. So
Yep.
if they make a donation, happy to send them the recording and, give 14 days to watch that one. And I guess, Gibbo, I'm just sort of saying, mate, that I'm trusting that the right people will honour the value, of what has been shared. And I think that, guys, I guess probably a call to action here would be that if you want to join me and Gibbo for the Awaken Blueprint, then simply just email me at trent@iamawakening.com.au. And that's all just, one word, IAMAWAKENING.com.au. And simply just put, I would like to join the Parents with Questions Awaken Blueprint. And I'll just send you the Zoom link for it. And I'll just send you my charity's details. And you can make, whatever you think is appropriate or whatever a meaningful donation is from you. And again, mate, we'll walk through the public foundation pathway, the categories, the pros and cons, what may suit different missions, where people get stuck, and, how to start thinking clearly about the structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mate, I might even bring some people in, Gibbo, that I've assisted before. I think it's a good idea, so people can hear directly.
We've had, I think, 20 to 30 people from our community join with you last time and go through the process of setting up foundations. So I think a lot of them looked at it. Not everyone did it, obviously. It was, as you said, it wasn't appropriate for everybody. But I know that a lot of those people are, well, you're obviously still in contact with them. So we're going to hear from some of them and hear how it's working for them in real time, and just talk to people who've been there before.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Those people that you speak of, mate, they are absolutely, I still speak to them. They're all pretty much family to these days, Gibbo. And it's one of the blessings that I get to receive in here when I get to help people drive, same as you, Gibbo, right? When you get to help people drive their purpose, they become very close. And obviously, when you're around good people that are doing good things, why would they not be family? And man, I think I'll call in 2 or 3 people from, from your community, from parents with questions that I've worked with that are now also a part of community is probably what I should say, mate.
Mm, yeah.
I've got some great people that are traveling around Australia, teaching their kids, living off the land, driving their mission as a public foundation as they travel around. I'll get a few people that are doing things a little bit different in their public foundations, mate. So let's do that.
Awesome. All right, mate. That sounds great. I'll leave your email in the show notes. So if you missed that, we'll leave it in the show notes so you can click on that and find Trent's email if you want to register for that. And mate, let's wrap it up. Give us if there's one thing to take from today, what's some parting wisdom for people to walk away with?
Mate, parting wisdom, Gibbo, mate. First and foremost, I just want to highlight yourself, mate. I'm really excited to be talking back with you again, reconnecting, talking to the Parents with Questions community. Not because I want everyone to convince them to set up a foundation. That's not the point. Some's a yes, some's a no, some's a not yet. And that's fine. But the goal is truth. And I do believe that there are people in this community who are ready to stop only questioning and to start building. As you said, mate, the future doesn't belong to the loudest critics. It belongs to the people willing to build, and today those builders have more tools than ever. And that's something which I'll dive in a little bit as well when we get into the blueprint, Gibbo, because getting your mission out these days, if you can use structure and technology, that is the golden ticket because things can get out quite quick. Zoom rooms can be your congregations where you can have gatherings, your education, you speak, whatever it may be. But I just want to encourage, if anything lands for the audience, Gibbo, would be get your purpose into a structure and use technology to push it harder, faster, and further.
Love it. All right, Trent. Well, mate, love your work. It's been illuminating once again, and look forward to a couple of weeks from now, depending on our release date here. But on the Thursday, the 18th, we'll look forward to the blueprint in more detail. Thanks so much for joining us, mate. Appreciate everything
Pleasure,
you're
mate.
doing.
Thanks for having me, Gibbo.